March 16, 1968. Quang Ngai Province, the coastal lowlands of South Vietnam, where rice paddies shine like broken mirrors under a hardening sun. Task Force Barker, moving with the weight of expectation. A search and destroy sweep aimed at a suspected Viet Cong nest inside Sawn Mee, a cluster of hamlets the Americans labeled with a single name, My-Lai. The plan is simple on paper. Artillery softens the target. Gunships rake the tree lines. Infantry goes in fast, and the enemy is forced to fight or vanish. At first light, in a small briefing area, the air is already thick, not with fog, but with the damp breath of marshes and paddies. Orders pass from mouth to mouth, clipped, confident. From the building in presentation, confident that we came by a bigger sting. The math isn't all beyond there. The problem we doesn't see that main, but the sport right head of films, like the sport reservated in one breather bottom, in the programment's sun. Orders pass from the marsh of the marshes and Viet Cong. Orders pass from marshes all the temperament life, in the bigness and the fortis of the front roll and batter. The fact that we need being the fact of the right of marshes on the marshes. These were not reservated, moving with terrid to marshes and paddock. This were Devon more difficult, that he learned the day and the brethren might, to sciences familiar. At first light, in a small briefing area, the air is already thick. In a small briefing area in the Americans' Love Place, March 16, 1968. The air is already open to the future of My-Lai. Orders start with the breath, and the Emirates started the part of the group on marsh. The areas were developed and falled, the areas on many their points. The men with falled as the patter of marsh breviary. The formatter is too fort against of the human load, the made them day at the lance of several ends, were training all of America, and the principality of briefing patter of marshes and Viet Cong. At first light, in a small briefing area, the air is already open. The area is already open from the future of My-Lai. The air is already open to marsh the differently sip and Major Bath. The area is already open from the mid of the right patter in the seam de Viet, the unit and the mera. The man or the belt of a workday were showing this depth in the unit. The air is already open from the mid of the differently sip and Major Bath. The formatter is previously to assemp the same of comfortable promises, then as well forth on the right patter in the future of My-Lai. The air is already open, the Emirates that test from the future of My-Lai. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the single. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the future of My-Lai. The air is already open, the Emirates that test from the future of My-Lai. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the single. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open, the Emirates that test from the future of My-Lai. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. The air is already open from the mid of the right patter in the unit and the sigil. A scout pilot, trained to read the ground like a map. Beside him, his crew. Glenn Andreotta, crew chief, scanning the earth for shapes that don't belong. Lawrence Colburn, door gunner, weapon ready, watching for muzzle flashes and movement. Their job is not glory. Their job is to see first and die first if they're wrong. The Ray-ven lifts, skids light, rotor wash tearing at tall grass. Then it slips into the morning, low and forward, a thin machine skimming above a country that does not forgive mistakes. From the cockpit, Vietnam stretches out in layers. Paddies, hedgerows, footpaths, water buffalo trails, smoke columns that could be breakfast fires or signals. Heat haze begins early here, a shimmer that turns distance into mirage, and the smells rise with it. Mud, standing water, vegetation crushed by rotor wash, the faint chemical bite of cordite carried on the breeze. Ahead, Sawn Mee, Mee-Lye. From altitude, it looks like any other hamlet. Thatched roofs, small squares of farmland, pockets of trees. But today, it is marked, not by enemy flags, by American intent. Below, helicopters deposit men of Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 21st Infantry, 11th Brigade, 23rd Infantry Division, 2-3rd Infantry Division, led by Captain Ernest Medina, and on the ground, a platoon leader with a name history will not let fade, Lieutenant William Calley. The Raven circles, low, deliberate. Thompson watches for the signature of a fight. Return fire, snapping tracers, enemy moving in disciplined lines. But the village below does not answer like an enemy. There are no firing positions, no bursts from tree lines, no muzzle flashes stitched through hedgerows. What he sees instead are people, unarmed, running, or standing frozen, women clutching children, old men bent like the bamboo around them, and then the first cracks of gunfire below, not aimed upward, aimed inward, into the village. The Raven dips, closer, the engine straining as Thompson drops altitude for a better look. Bodies appear in the dirt. Not one, not two, a line as if arranged by gravity and fear. The air changes, not with enemy resistance, with something worse. Smoke begins to pool over the hamlet, not from burning bunkers, but from burning homes. And the gunfire? It isn't chaotic like a firefight. It is steady, methodical, close range. Thompson's eyes track the movements. American soldiers moving through clusters of civilians, and then civilians falling where they stand. In that cockpit, in that moment, something snaps into focus. This is not a battle. This is not contact. This is friendly fire against the unarmed. And the scout pilot realizes the fire isn't coming from the enemy. It's coming from his own side. And history turns right there in the thin shadow of an Oh-Eitch-2-Three Ray-ven. A scout pilot's mind is built on procedures. Identify, confirm, report. Thompson banks hard, keeps the Raven low, and begins to hunt for context like a man searching for an exit in a burning building. The ground is alive with American movement. Men spread in fire teams, rifles at the shoulder, sweeping through huts and ditches. But there are no Viet Cong sprinting between cover, no incoming rounds, no casualty evacuation, no sign of an enemy that is fighting back. Thompson sees a wounded Vietnamese woman crawling, slow, desperate. He watches a soldier approach. The woman lifts an arm, not in threat, but in instinct, a human gesture that begs without language. A shot. She collapses. From above, it is clean, instant. From below, it is murder. The Raven drops even lower, rotor wash whipping dust and grass. Thompson sets down for the first time, landing one. Skids touch near the wounded, near the soldiers. He steps out, boots sinking into wet soil, the smell of smoke and blood mixing with the sweetness of crushed vegetation. He confronts what he sees with the only weapon he has in that moment, his voice. He demands medical help for the wounded. He points, he gestures. He speaks like a man trying to force reality to obey regulation. The response is cold, dismissive, hostile. This is the mission, they imply. This is orders. Thompson climbs back in because he has to see more. Because if he reports, it has to be undeniable. The Raven lifts and circles again, closer, tighter, like a vulture that refuses to feed. Bodies now appear in clusters, in courtyards, along footpaths, near irrigation ditches where people might have tried to hide. The gunfire continues, short bursts, controlled. Landing 2. Thompson drops near another group, tries again. He wants to speak to command on the ground. He needs a name, a rank, an anchor. Captain Ernest Medina is in the area. Lieutenant William Calley is leading men through the hamlet. Thompson pushes into their space like a man walking onto a live range. He asks, "What is happening?" He points at the dead. He points at the civilians. He forces the question into the open. The answers do not satisfy. They do not explain. They deflect. They insist these are enemy. They insist this is justified. But the bodies on the ground do not carry rifles. The children do not carry grenades. The old women do not carry radios. And the Raven lifts again, because now Thompson is no longer gathering information. Now he is racing time. Landing 3. By the third time he touches down, the picture is complete. The village is being emptied with gunfire, not searched, not secured, erased. Thompson's crew feels it too. Andreotta scanning, jaw clenched, seeing the same impossible scenes through the open door. Colburn gripping his weapon, not aimed at the tree line, but watching American soldiers with a new kind of tension, a tension no training manual prepares you for. The scout team is supposed to protect the infantry from ambush. Instead, they are witnessing an atrocity, unfolding in daylight, with no enemy in sight. The Oh-Eitch-2-Three Ray-ven is not an attack helicopter. It is a glass bubble with a rotor. Low-level reconnaissance, slow orbit, constant exposure. A scout pilot flies at treetop height, sometimes lower, because altitude hides detail. Up high, everything looks calm. Down low, you see hands, faces, blood, fear. In a scout crew, roles are absolute. The pilot, Thompson, navigates, positions, communicates with higher and lower. The observer and crew chief, Andreotta, watches the ground with an operator's eye, calling out movement, assessing what matters. The gunner, Colburn, is the last layer, the one who can fire, the one who can protect the aircraft during a landing, the one who can become the line between survival and disaster. And now, that line is shifting, because the threat is no longer theoretical. It is not concealed in brush. It is wearing American uniforms. Thompson keeps the Raven low, skimming the hamlet's edges, and sees a group of civilians moving toward cover. A bunker, a crude shelter, packed tight with people who have learned that the ground is safer than open air. But the infantry is closing, and the way they move, rifles leveled, is not the posture of apprehension. It is the posture of intent. The civilians huddle, trapped. If the soldiers reach them, there will be no questioning, no detention, only gunfire. Thompson's mind runs the situation like a tactical problem. He has one aircraft, a light observation helicopter, no armor, limited fuel, limited authority. And yet, he has proximity, he has visibility, he has a radio, and he has moral certainty, hardening into something heavier than fear. He commits. The Raven drops, fast, low, directly toward the bunker. Thompson lands the Oh-Eitch-23 Ray-ven in the open, in the space between American soldiers and Vietnamese civilians. It is a move that is tactically insane and morally exact. The rotor wash kicks dust and debris into the air, the helicopter rocking slightly on its skids. Thompson steps out. He is not screaming. He is not grandstanding. He is doing what officers are supposed to do when something is wrong: intervene. He faces the approaching troops, weapons visible, posture aggressive. He tells them to stop. The bunker behind him is packed, terrified faces pressed into shadow. Children, women, old. People, no weapons, no uniforms, no threat. Thompson's voice cuts through the noise of rotor blades, and he does something that changes the geometry of the moment. He turns to his own crew and gives an order that will echo for decades. He tells Lawrence Colburn to cover him, not against the Viet Cong, against American soldiers. Colburn's weapon comes up, not as a gesture, as a commitment. A gunner aiming at friendly forces is not just a breach of protocol, it is a moral declaration. If they keep shooting, if they fire into that bunker, Colburn will fire back. Thompson watches the soldiers hesitate. In their faces, confusion, anger, the strain of men who believe they are carrying out a mission and are suddenly confronted by a fellow American placing himself in front of their rifles. Thompson demands they back off. He demands they cease fire. He is trying to reach someone with authority on the ground. He tries to find Lieutenant William Calley. He tries to force a conversation that cannot be walked away from. Reconstructed from later testimony, the exchange is tense, clipped, and raw. Thompson points to the civilians. He makes it plain, these are non-combatants. Calley's posture, according to accounts, is rigid, defensive, refusing the premise. The gulf between them is not rank, it is reality. One man sees a battlefield, the other sees a slaughter. Thompson doesn't posture for heroism. He does not come to negotiate philosophy. He issues a direct warning. If these civilians are harmed, he will report it, and he will not be silent. Behind him, the bunker breathes fear. In front of him, armed Americans calculate risk. And above them all, the rotor blades continue their relentless hammering, like a clock, like a countdown. The standoff holds for a moment that feels longer than it is. This is the line in the sand, not drawn with speeches, but with an Oh-Eitch-23 Ray-ven planted in a kill zone and a crew willing to defy their own side. And in that, suspended second, Hugh Thompson Jr. has done the unthinkable. He has turned his aircraft into a barricade. He has turned his crew into a moral firing line. He has placed honor above orders in the middle of a village that is dying. And the battlefield, for the first time that morning, pauses because one scout pilot decided the mission had crossed a boundary, and he refused to let it go further. The standoff at the bunker breaks the rhythm of the killing, but it does not end it. Not everywhere. Mee-Lye is larger than one patch of ground, and violence moves faster than reason. Thompson climbs back into the Oh-Eitch-2-3 Ray-ven and lifts off again, low, searching. The village scrolls beneath the bubble canopy like a map drawn in smoke. He spots movement, a small knot of civilians, sprinting, stumbling, trying to reach cover along a tree line. American troops shift toward them. The geometry is obvious from above. If the infantry closes, the civilians disappear. Not into detention, into silence. Thompson drops the Ray-ven hard, aggressive, landing between the civilians and the line of advancing rifles, Skids bite into the dirt. Rotor wash flattens grass, rattles branches, throws dust into faces on both sides. He's done it once. Now he does it again. A pattern becomes a doctrine, improvised in real time. Thompson calls for support over the radio, not to attack a hostile position, but to extract civilians from American guns. He requests gunships, armed helicopters that can put steel and authority into the airspace. In Vietnam, that request is normally a prelude to destruction. Here, it becomes a warning flare. The gunships arrive overhead, circling like hard-eyed guardians. They do not fire, but their presence changes the risk calculation on the ground. An American rifleman may ignore a helicopter pilot. He is less likely to ignore armed aircraft watching from above. Thompson directs the civilians toward the waiting aircraft, toward any chance of survival. He coordinates like a man running an emergency landing zone under fire, because that's what it is, except the fire is American. Then comes the ditch, a long, shallow drainage cut, a scar in the earth, lined with bodies. From above, it looks like a trench after an artillery strike. But there was no enemy barrage here. Thompson sees movement among the dead, a flicker, a sign that someone is still alive inside that pile of silence. He sets the Ray-ven down nearby. Andreotta jumps out, moving fast, eyes locked on the ditch. This is not a medic's controlled approach. This is raw human urgency. Andreotta climbs down into the ditch, surrounded by death, searching for the living. He finds a child, a young boy, stunned, coated with mud, breathing. Andreotta lifts him up, hands careful, steady, and passes him to Thompson's aircraft. In a place where humanity is being erased, the act of saving one child becomes a defiant statement, not in words, in motion. The Ray-ven lifts again, and for a brief second, above the village, it carries something more valuable than intelligence. It carries proof. Proof that these are civilians. Proof that survivors exist. Proof that the mission has broken its own rules. Thompson continues the pattern. Spot, land, interpose, extract. Again and again, until the survivors he can reach are out of the kill zone. It is not enough to undo what's been done. Nothing can. But it is enough to stop more from happening in front of his eyes. And when the last extraction is done, Thompson turns the Ray-ven away from the hamlet and points it toward the one. Place this must go next. A radio net, a report, a reckoning. War crimes don't begin with paperwork. They end with it. Thompson reports what he saw immediately, not as rumor, not as vague concern, as direct observation from the air and from the ground. He pushes the message up the chain, because that is the only weapon left to him now. The radio traffic is urgent, controlled, but charged with disbelief. A scout pilot alleging Americans are killing civilians is not routine. It is a grenade thrown into the command structure, and for a moment, the system hesitates. Then it tries to protect itself. The first reaction in many organizations, especially in wartime, is not to confront the truth, but to contain it. What happens at Mee-Lye is quickly wrapped in language. After-action reports, body counts, enemy killed, success, a village cleared. In the early official narrative, the operation is painted as a victory over Viet Cong forces. Civilian deaths, if acknowledged at all, are reduced to accidents, crossfire, the fog of war, a black spot on a clean record, and therefore something to be scrubbed away. But Thompson is not alone. His crew saw it. Other witnesses saw it. And the truth has a way of surviving, even when buried. Months pass, then more. Men return home carrying the weight of what they watched, or what they did, or what they refused to do. One veteran, Ron Ridenour, begins writing letters, not to gossip, to force an investigation. His words push the story outward, into offices, into desks, into hands that can't pretend they never received it. Then comes the press. Then come the investigations. Then come the hearings. And in that process, Thompson's testimony becomes a fixed point, not because he wanted fame, because he refused to lie. He tells the story as a scout pilot would, chronological, body unforgiving, the mission briefing, the lack of enemy fire, the bodies, the landings, the bunker, the extraction, the gun aimed not at Viet Cong, but at Americans to stop Americans. In the machinery of accountability, that is dynamite, and it makes enemies. Thompson is not universally praised in the moment. He is attacked, ostracized, accused of betrayal, because to admit what he reported is to admit the Army can commit crimes. And that admission is a threat, not to the enemy, but to the myth of moral certainty. Only years later, when distance makes truth easier to tolerate, does recognition arrive. Decades late, like a medal delivered to a battlefield that's already gone cold. In 1998, 30 years after Mee-Lye, Thompson and Colburn received the Soldier's Medal, and An-dree-OH-tuh receives it posthumously, for bravery not against the enemy, but against the collapse of duty itself. The citation can honor courage. It cannot refund the years. It cannot undo the price they paid for refusing to look away. Time passes, but Mee-Lye does not fade. It hardens into history, into photographs, into testimony transcripts, into names carved into memorials. Hugh Thompson Jr. carries it the way veterans carry certain days, not as a story, as a weight. He returns to Sawn Mee years later, walking ground that once shook under rotor wash. The village is changed, rebuilt, but the air still seems heavy, like it remembers. Survivors meet him. Some are old now, faces lined by decades that began with a morning of gunfire. They do not speak to him as an enemy. They speak to him as the man who landed in front of rifles, as the voice that broke the pattern, as the helicopter that became a shield. In that meeting, the war becomes personal in a different way, not through hatred, through recognition. Thompson does not claim to have saved the village. He knows what happened there. He knows the scale. He knows what could not be stopped. But there is a difference, a critical difference, between a soldier who follows orders into darkness and a soldier who refuses when the order breaks honor. That is the dividing line, the line in the sand. And it is not drawn by rank. It is drawn by choice. In the end, Mee-Lye becomes more than an atrocity. It becomes a test case for the oldest question in war. What happens when obedience collides with conscience? Some men chose obedience. One scout crew chose conscience. In a thin helicopter, hovering over history, with the rotor blades beating like a clock. Hugh Thompson Jr. didn't stop a war. He didn't rewrite the strategy. He didn't change the machinery of Vietnam. But on one morning, in one village, he proved something that still matters. That honor is not a slogan. It is an action, taken when it costs the most. Spectre 1-1. End transmission.